Welcome to today's training, ILP Youth Transition Planning. I am Rosemary Ivendetti. I'm the Independent Living Program Coordinator for DHS Child Welfare, and I'll be one of your presenters, and we'll have two others, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Carrie Van Dyke, and I'm the ILP Youth Transition Specialist.
And I'm Jennifer Blakesley. I'm a researcher at Portland State, and I've been working with Carrie and Rosemary on the ILP transition planning process.
Objectives for today are to gain an understanding of the following. We'll cover the background for the transition planning process, the purpose and philosophy, as well as completing the following processes: Transition Readiness Discussion Guide, Youth Assessment Summary, Youth Transition Plan, Independent Living Skills Planning Checklist, the Monthly Services and Progress Report. And before we go much further, if you do not have the full set of the CE69 series of forms, which are everything I just mentioned, you should pause this video and download the forms. The Transition Readiness Discussion Guide is the CE69D, as in David. The Assessment Summary is the CE69. Transition Plan is CE69A. The Planning Checklist is the CE69B, and the Monthly Services and Progress Report is the CE69C. So we'll also discuss how documents build off one another and additional training that's available for you. So we'll start with some background. We want to state the aim of transition planning in general and the ILP program specifically is to ensure youth have identified goals and are receiving the appropriate skill building services and supports to help them make a successful transition to adulthood. All states receive federal funding specifically to support independent living skill building for youth aging out of foster care, plus various funding streams for education, training, and housing subsidies. In Oregon, these services and resources are administered through the Independent Living Program and Youth Transitions team in Salem. The ILP contracts with local nonprofits and governmental entities throughout the state to deliver these services broader transition planning process, which includes participation from the entire service team, caseworker, foster parents, etc. Eligibility for various services and funding varies, but in general, youth who are in foster care or had been in foster care at age 16 or older can be referred to the ILP provider between ages 16 through 20. For youth in ILP, the provider is delivering skill building services and is managing transition planning, goal setting, and documentation, as well as helping youth access the various housing and education funding streams. When it comes to skill building specifically, Oregon now has a clear framework for transition planning and independent living services. State IL programs are generally framed around federal guidelines for funding and tracking independent living services and support that are expected to lead to positive outcomes in young adulthood, including education, career preparation, risk prevention, money management, and housing. Additionally, Oregon's program includes the soft skills that need to be developed to promote success in these areas, such as problem solving, stress management, healthy coping skills, and stable relationships with supportive adults. We will walk through all of the various ILP forms, but first we're going to take a look at step 4. This is the ILP Service Planning Checklist. The checklist reflects every independent living topic or skill that Oregon's ILP covers with young people. This is the overall curriculum in Oregon, and although it may not include everything you might work on with every youth, and not all of these 100 or so topics are going to be relevant for every youth, all youth are assessed in terms of these service domains and related skills. Step 4 is a cumulative checklist and reference document to track things you may cover with youth over time. Additionally, these service domains are tracked in terms of increasing readiness as youth gain knowledge and skills and accomplish their transition-related goals. And now Jennifer is going to talk to you about the purpose and philosophy.
Thank you, Rosemary. As Rosemary said, today we're going to walk through the purpose and philosophy behind the transition planning forms and processes. There are additional training resources that we'll cover at the end that are more focused on ILP program logistics. But one of the things we've learned is that when you focus too much on the various state and federal requirements for transition planning or the mechanics of how to fill out every field in every form, then the intent of the overall process can get lost. So that's what we're going to focus on for this webinar. So first, transition planning and ILP are proactive services that need to be focused on the long term while also accommodating dynamic youth needs and challenges in the present. This can be difficult, which is why the Oregon ILP framework is also built around intentional, individualized youth engagement and assessment. We know that youth services are not one size fits all, and the transition planning process is designed with the following built-in assumptions in mind. First, not all youth are going to have the same goals or be ready to learn the same skills at the same time. Learning happens in stages, and you should be intentional about what skills you're teaching and when. You can't work on everything all the time, and you want to be focused on the things you are working on. Next, like youth goals, youth readiness to engage in transition planning is determined by circumstances and development. We want services to be able to flex with where the youth are at without losing sight of the big picture goals. Overall, we want transition planning to be youth-driven and accommodating, but also comprehensive and proactive. The process is designed to guide and prompt providers, caseworkers, and young people to regularly check back in on progress, to change course if needed, and to keep track of skills that haven't been covered yet. Lastly, if you're a new ILP provider watching this, we know that you're someone who cares about young people and believes that they can accomplish the goals that are important to them, and you're ready to support them in reaching those goals. But you probably don't like to do paperwork for paperwork's sake. That's why we're focusing on the purpose of the documentation for this conversation, because we want it to be helpful to you in doing your work rather than feeling like a burden. So today we're going to talk about how these assumptions I just talked about are built into 4 aspects of transition planning. So that's the life skills assessment process, including the initial assessment and then 6-month updates. The transition plan itself, also updated every 6 months. And the IL skills planning checklist, also updated every 6 months. And the monthly ILP service tracking and reporting to the caseworker and ILP central office. Ideally, assessment, planning, and ILP services should be directly linked. So the first thing to address is life skills assessment, which includes the transition readiness discussion guide and the life skills assessment summary. These are steps 1 and 2. First, we'll look at the assessment summary, step 2. The assessment is organized into 3 main areas: well-being and community, education and employment, and daily living, which include the required federal categories for IL services, plus additional domains for personal growth and social development, and for transportation and other skills. The assessment is further divided into 3 stages of readiness: Stage 1, awareness; Stage 2, learning; and Stage 3, doing. These stages are to clarify not just whether a youth has a skill or not, but where they are along a spectrum of learning, from first developing an awareness of a topic and why it's important to understand, to actually gaining knowledge and learning skills, and then to applying these skills, initially with support and eventually without support. On the back of the assessment are instructions and a rubric for determining where to mark readiness within each domain, based on assessment of awareness, knowledge, and experience in using the skills covered within the category. For example, if youth demonstrated solid awareness of what college is and why it's important, but had not yet learned anything specific about getting into college or how to pay for it, then you might mark post-secondary education as the first circle in Stage 2 to indicate they're just starting to learn new skills and gain knowledge. The assessment is completed to inform initial transition planning and ILP services and is meant to provide an overall snapshot of youth readiness. Step 2 includes space to know important priorities for that youth for the coming 6-month period, including areas of focus and goal setting. So this is whether they're working on goals on their own or with ILP help, with help from their caregiver or caseworker, from school or clubs they're a part of, etc. Not every domain will be worked on within a 6-month period, and this is also where you might note relevant additional information that would help someone else understand why some domains might be less relevant for this youth at this time. So developmental or circumstantial factors that might explain why you're not focusing on something at a certain time point. You may or may not complete the summary with youth input. Ideally, youth involvement will inform the transition planning process and empower youth to recognize areas where they're doing well and where they need support or knowledge to gain new skills. However, although this form was based on tools that were developed by young people who had been in foster care, we recognize that some youth may perceive this as rating them. That is not the intention at all, and we leave it to you to know best whether to work on this step 2 with each individual youth or to complete it on your own to go with the transition plan. The assessment summary is always updated when the transition plan is updated, so it can be used to track increased readiness over time. But how do you consistently determine where to mark youth on these various domains? When you are starting services with a youth who is new to ILP or new to your program, you'll begin with the Transition Readiness Discussion Guide, Step 1. The guide includes a range of questions that get at aspects of the various skill-building domains. These questions are meant to be asked over multiple informal rapport-building meetings within the first 90 days of service. Compared to completing a long survey online, this is a more in-depth conversational approach to assessing youth awareness, knowledge, and experience in these areas. Within each domain, the questions are youth-friendly and open-ended, and questions can be skipped or revised as needed, and the domains don't need to be covered in order. For example, within a domain, you may find some specific questions are not relevant yet, or are sensitive topics for that youth. You may quickly realize that a 16-year-old has very limited awareness about college, so you don't need to drill down into the more detailed questions. Or the question about healthy sexuality may be sensitive for a young person who experienced sexual abuse, and that topic may need to wait until a stronger relationship and trust has had time to develop. The notes areas on Step 1 are to jot down helpful information for completion of the assessment summary and the transition plan, Steps 2 and 3. But this is not turned into anyone. The Step 1 document isn't turned into anyone. So now that we've talked about a few of the forms, we're going to tell you how they work together. So the Step 4 service planning checklist that Rosemary showed you at the beginning is the key to creating an accurate youth assessment summary, along with the discussion guide. So you use Step 1, the discussion guide, and Step 4, the service planning checklist, together to update the Step 2 youth assessment summary. The checklist contains the skills that youth need to attain or where we want the youth to be at the end of their ILP experience. As you work through the Transition Readiness Discussion Guide and complete the youth assessment summary, you should keep in mind where the youth is based on your conversations compared to where the youth needs to be based on the skills the checklist outlines. Only then can you accurately create an assessment summary. In most cases, you wouldn't go through the entire discussion guide again when you were conducting the 6-month update of the assessment and the plan, unless the youth had switched to a different provider or when there's a section that becomes more relevant for a youth. For example, the healthy sexuality discussion may not have been possible during the first or second assessment discussion, but could be covered as youth get older or as you have more time to build rapport and to grow that into a trusting relationship. And now I'm going to hand it over to Carrie to talk about the youth transition plan.
Thank you, Jennifer. So the transition plan is completed in the first 90 days of ILP service and is updated every 6 months. This plan combines some of the assessed domains into categories. So as you can see here, the first page includes a section to describe the youth's involvement with the plan. Any other service plans that might be relevant, including the Casey Life Skills Assessment, which is now optional, and a section for youth to describe their strengths, challenges, and personal priorities in their own words. Here, as on the other forms, we have intentionally put the personal growth and social development section up front to communicate its importance, but we do recognize that this is a difficult section for many youth to complete, and there is no need to fill this page out first. The plan includes transition readiness indicators throughout the categories, which are a cumulative list of outcomes we'd like to see for most youth by the time that they exit the child welfare system. These are actually intended to be checked off over time, and most or all should be marked on the last transition plan prior to the youth's exit from foster care. The lower half of the transition planning pages have sections to describe current status, long-term goals, and short-term tasks. Depending on the youth's priorities and your assessment of their skills, you may only describe a few sections in depth on your initial plans. For priority areas, set goals that are meaningful for the youth with specific next steps and identified support people. There's more flexibility for lower priority domains, but please include at least a broad long-term vision or goal and say enough about current status to clarify that it's not a youth priority right at this time, and to explain if and when they would actually start focusing on that domain in the future. The transition plan is reviewed during a team meeting to go over youth's goals and to clarify who will be helping them, especially whether this will be you as the ILP provider versus other youth support people. So there are two types of meetings. First, a comprehensive transition plan meeting may include you, the young person, their caseworker, plus additional support people the youth wants to be there. For example, this may be a foster parent or a supportive service provider, like a counselor or a CASA, or informal support people, like a mentor or a close friend. Ideally, the young person has been prepared by you to lead this meeting, or at least be sure that their voice is heard and preferences are reflected both in the plan and at the meeting. When caseworkers present comprehensive transition plans to judges, they'll actually be looking for indications that the youth was involved in creating their own plan, and that they were able to invite support people to attend, and that multiple team members are assisting youth with their goals. On the other hand, a less formal youth transition plan meeting may include just you and the young person, although the caseworker should always be invited and encouraged to attend. It's possible that there will be some caseworkers or even entire branches where comprehensive YDM-style meetings are not regularly conducted due to time constraints or lack of familiarity, and some may actually skip the smaller meetings with just you and the youth. However, caseworkers do have a responsibility to be at the table along with any of the youth support team to help the youth to achieve their goals. And you as an ILP provider should not only be the only entity helping a youth with gaining skills to transition to adulthood. If you are having trouble getting workers to attend the meetings, especially if this is impacting the youth's progress on their goals, please let your program manager or the DHS ILP program coordinator know. So next is step 4, the service planning checklist, which is a concrete list of the 10 to 15 topics or skills within each domain that we want most youth to be familiar with prior to exiting care. For those of you new to Oregon's ILP, this is the overall ILP curriculum. With that being said, there will be exceptions depending on development or circumstance. We can imagine that a youth who experiences developmental delays may be faced with barriers that prevent them from mastering some of these life skills to the degree that another youth may. So additionally, many youth will gain knowledge and experience in some areas through foster parents at school or through supportive adults in their networks, as we imagine that there are several people who can assist the youth with gaining skills. And in one way or another, we're hoping youth have opportunities to gain these sets of skills. The checklist also includes drop-downs to specify which stage the young person is in for the particular skill, which will vary within the domain. In this way, the concrete checklist can be used in concert with the open-ended discussion guide to complete the Step 2 assessment summary. The purpose of the checklist is to serve as a cumulative record for providers to track the services they've delivered in these areas, or skills that youth have acquired in other ways, so that we can keep track of the big picture goals to increase transition readiness. The checklist is not something that is generally completed all at once, but it does need to be kept current and should reflect which domains you have already opened or closed. The checklist may be requested by the caseworker at any time, and it is also turned into ILP Central Office at the close of ILP services, as this is how we'll know how much progress the ILP program is making across all different regions and programs. And with that, I will turn it over to Jennifer, who is going to be reviewing how these all work together.
So now that we've covered steps 1 through 4, we'd like to review how these work together. As youth are beginning transition planning, the Step 2 assessment summary and the Step 3 transition plan are completed within 90 days. After the initial 90-day engagement and assessment period, the assessment summary and the transition plan are then updated every 6 months. The solid lines around Step 2 and 3 indicate that these are things that are updated and then turned into ILP Central Office, caseworkers, and/or the court every 6 months. To update the Step 2 summary, consider progress the youth has made, as indicated by goals accomplished, the service planning checklist, Step 4, monthly reports, and other indicators. You may move youth to a higher circle within a stage or move on to the next stage due to progress. Once youth have moved to the next stage in a domain, you would not move them back to a previous stage, even if there was no progress within the stage. The stage represents whether a youth has demonstrated the capacity to learn new skills in Stage 2 or to apply skills, Stage 3, even if they are not currently doing so. However, it may be appropriate to record the status at a lower circle within the stage due to normal setbacks limiting progress since the last update. Note that the update does not require you to go through the discussion guide all over again, only that you would cover any sections that are newly relevant or would otherwise be helpful to review for the 6-month update. However, the updates to Step 2 and 3 are intended to prompt you, the young person, and others on their team not only to celebrate any recent youth successes in achieving their goals, but also to pause and think about where progress is not being made and where new needs or barriers might be emerging and how the youth team can support them in various ways. Lastly, during this process, you would return to Step 4 to update any skills and to generate ideas for what should be covered through ILP services. This is where the youth transition plan translates into what you are doing as an ILP service provider. This brings us to the Step 5 monthly report. An important thing to remember are that Steps 4 and 5 are to keep ongoing track of how you as an ILP provider are supporting the youth so that you can report your service delivery over time and report youth progress to the caseworker and ILP central office each month. Next, we'll briefly look at the monthly services and progress report, which aligns with the previous steps. Step 5 is specifically used to report ILP service delivery to caseworkers and central office, and therefore it looks different during the first 90 days versus during the months of regular ILP service delivery versus the month when you are closing out an ILP client. However, Step 5 is always used to specify the following: any one-on-one meetings you have or ILP group activities the youth attends, the dates when the Step 2 assessment summary and Step 3 transition plan are completed or are coming due, as well as when the benchmark review is completed or is coming due, the youth's current education and employment status, any specific barriers to service delivery for that month. This is important for the caseworker to know and helps to increase awareness of common barriers at the state level. And lastly, any case notes you want the caseworker or ILP Central to see that would help them understand what you and the youth worked on that month. The differences in how you fill out Step 5 are all about the status of the service domains. In the first 90 days, you check the first 90 days box in the engagement and assessment section in the top of the form, and you don't need to mark anything in the 9 service domains. Once you finish the first assessment and plan, Step 2 and 3, you start completing regular monthly reports, and here's where you'll show the ongoing status for the 9 service domains. You'll show which stage youth are at in each domain based on your last assessment, which domains are currently open and are being worked on each month, and or whether domains are currently on hold or have been closed as completed with or without progress. You'll show open domains if this is an area which the youth wants to work on based on their transition plan or other priorities. Note that we expect there to be only a few to a handful of domains open at a time for most youth. We want you to strategically focus your efforts. So you may briefly cover something new that's not a priority. For example, you have a 15-minute conversation about leasing an apartment because it came up in conversation, but this isn't an area they're working on and they're not expected to cover the entire housing domain in the near future. Then don't open the service. But if something big comes up, for example, a crisis occurs or a brand new goal is identified, so that a new domain is now relevant and is expected to stay relevant, then open the domain. Once you pass the 90-day period and are in regular service delivery, you'll need to review the progress made in the past month and decide whether you want to change the domain stage or status for any of the domains. If not, just check the box that says no change since last report. But you may want to make some adjustments if there has been significant progress since the last report or a lack of progress. So you may move up the stage up a level if you think the youth has moved from awareness to learning or from learning to doing within a domain. To help you decide, go back to the Step 4 checklist and update the skills for that domain. If most of them are at a higher level than on the monthly report, but they're still working on that area, move the domain up a stage and leave it open. If they have been open at stage 3 for a while and they seem to be achieving goals without your support, review the Step 4 checklist to be sure you've covered everything in the domain, and if so, go ahead and close it as completed. If the youth is not making progress on an open domain, you may decide to close the domain or put it on hold. One way to think about this is to consider whether the holdup is circumstantial or due to a lack of engagement. For example, if you didn't work on a domain that month because you're waiting for paperwork to go through, just put it on hold. If it stays that way for 60 or more days, then close it with either some progress or no progress if that's the case. But if the lack of progress is because the youth is not interested in something they previously identified as something they wanted to work on, despite your efforts to engage them in that area, then you can close it with some progress or with no progress if that's the case. The domains on the progress report reflect the work that you are doing as a provider. So if you're wondering whether to open or close a domain, ask yourself, is this currently a priority area for this youth? Are they engaged in this area? And if not, is there anything I can do to potentially get them more engaged? Is my work with them in this area done? Have I covered everything in step 4? Do they need ongoing support from me? These questions should help you know when to open or to close a service domain. On the other hand, the stage reflects where the youth is at in their learning. In this case, you may ask yourself, what kind of support am I providing? Am I encouraging them to focus more on an area I think they should be paying attention to? Am I pointing out things that they don't know that they don't know? That's stage 1, awareness. Or am I downloading information, walking them through activities, or trying to expose them to new people, settings, experiences, or behaviors? That's stage 2, learning. Am I supporting them when they ask for help, talking through experiences and discussing what worked or didn't work for them, reminding them of something that I think they already know, or just pointing them in the right direction? That's probably stage 3, doing. Lastly, when ILP services are closing, the monthly report reflects closing status. First, go back to step 4 and update the stages for any domains you had open or skills that you were working on. Then update the domain's service status based on where you ended. If a domain is open, then close it with no progress, some progress, or completed. If a domain was previously closed, make sure step 4 has the right closure status and stage. As you're doing this, remember that the youth may have gained additional knowledge or skills since you last worked on the skill with them, even though you did not teach them. Then update the monthly report so that all domains that were ever opened by you are closed with a specific date. Lastly, select an overall service closure status based on the domains that were ever open in your program. If the majority are one status or another, choose that status. Or if you have a few that were closed with no progress and a few that were closed as completed, then select some progress, for example. So that's the monthly report. Now I'll hand it back to Rosemary for a summary.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next, we want to be clear that the new process is designed to be flexible and intentional around skill building. We don't want people trying to cover all domains at once, because then we risk none of them getting the attention they need. We encourage you to intentionally focus on a few areas at a time and then move to focus on new areas in the next 6-month period, as guided by the assessment, the transition plan, the youth's needs, and the youth's current interests. We know that we're also asking you to balance multiple objectives. For example, we want transition planning to be youth-driven and guided by a youth's self-determination and their own sense of their wants and needs. But we also want to take any opportunity that we can to raise awareness and to encourage them to gain knowledge and life skills in areas that they may not yet see as important. This is the proactive aim of ILP, and we're hoping to support informed and healthy decisions down the road. Next, we know that in some cases, you will be balancing transition planning and skill building with emerging crises that immediately focus your efforts on specific areas, like housing or risk prevention. That's expected and can simply be reflected on your monthly reports as the reason that you may be putting some activities on hold for a month or 2 and shifting your focus. We want to encourage everyone to use the Step 4 service planning checklist to guide their transition planning, to train new staff, and to use in supervision as needed. We started this webinar off by talking about the consistent framework for Oregon's independent living programming, and this is the most detailed version of what we want services to cover. That we will also distribute a life skills curriculum guide that lists specific resources, such as online curriculum or additional assessment. And we will keep this updated as we learn of new tools. I will now hand this over to Carrie to talk to you a little bit more about additional training.
Thanks, Rosemary. As you may imagine, with all of these changes, we've also needed to update our training. And our training net links can be found on our ILP website, which is listed here on the screen, as well as the statewide provider list, which could help with networking with your peers across the state. There are also 2 additional videos that can be shared with community partners or foster parents to help understand the process as well. For the people that do billing and invoicing, there's an additional training video on the monthly progress reports and invoicing training. And let's go to the website and show you how to get there. So for the list of providers, you'll notice in the menu there's the ILP Provider list, and that will give you a current list of the ILP programs and their contact people. So for training, you can find that on the Provider Resources page under the training category. And that lists not only the ILP net links, but also a video for invoicing and the monthly progress report. For more additional information on the youth transition training video, that can be found on our rules, policies, and procedures page. And it's right there. The website can be a good resource for materials and other supports.
Thank you, Carrie. For those of you out there watching our training, we hope you're excited as we are with the ILP intake and transition planning process and forms. The ILP Central Office team is here to help you be successful. Please do not hesitate to contact us with any questions you have or issues you may be experiencing. I will show you our contact list, but it's also available on the website that Carrie was just at. So in closing, we want to provide you with the ILP and Youth Transitions team's contact information. We wish you the best as you begin your work with Oregon's foster youth. Again, please contact us with any questions.